The third approach to negotiation is interest-based negotiation, and this is really where my training comes in. This was probably the form, other than as a child watching my dad with power-based negotiation, and what power-based negotiation I've been able to engage in over the course of my adult life. This is the one that I'm most trained in. This is the one that I have the most understanding of and the most practice with, because in my mediation, mediation is almost always, or I should say, general civil mediation that I used to do is interest-based negotiation. And if you're interested in interest-based negotiation, this is the book for you. It's 200 pages or less than 200 pages. It's a quick read. It's very accessible. Fisher, Ury, and Patton. This is the way of negotiating in the Harvard Negotiation Project. So give that a look. Purchase that. Keep that on your shelf for future reference. Interest-based negotiation is this is a move away from adversarial forms of negotiating to focus on interests rather than these hardened positions. A hardened position is I'm only going to pay $10,000 for a car, rather than I need a car to get back and forth to work. So interest, your interests in most of the negotiating that you want to do is far more important and far more powerful as an impetus for getting a negotiated agreement. So. And I'll say this, that power negotiation, as I mentioned a minute ago, you tend to withhold information. In interest-based negotiation, you're putting all the information out on the table. You're sharing what you know with the other party in the negotiation. You don't want to withhold anything that might, because that's going to stand in the way of you getting a good agreement, an agreement that works for you and the other party. That's the idea behind interest-based negotiation. You have to reveal your information to have a better outcome. It's about creating a win-win situation. That's probably the best description of it. So let me give you an example of what we're talking about with interests rather than positions. If my wife and I are arguing over the last orange in the fruit basket, I want to eat the orange because I like oranges. My wife wants it because she wants to make an orange cake. And so if we don't talk to one another, we just say, I want the orange. And she says, no, I want the orange. Well, if that's where our negotiation ends, the best each one of us does is we get half an orange, if we're willing to compromise. Or I guess the best negotiated agreement would be half an orange. But if we sat down and we said, look, I just want to eat the orange. And if she says, well, that's great, I just want to use the peel, then we both get what we want. With there just being one orange, we've expanded the pie. We've opened up new possibilities for what we thought was a scarce item. Okay? So interest-based negotiation is all about talking through, communicating what your interests are rather than these hardened positions and strategic demands. So hallmarks of interest-based negotiation, and these are straight from the book, straight from chapter 3. It's a focus, as I've already said, on interests rather than positions. Your interests are your needs, your values, your concerns, whatever is the negotiation is concerning, rather than those strategic demands. The second hallmark of interest-based negotiation is inventing options, coming up with new things, just like being able to realize that, hey, we've only got one orange and we've got two people, and both of us can do better than just half an orange. Okay? Inventing options, figuring out how to come away with a win-win situation. That's what interest-based negotiation is about. The third hallmark is applying objective criteria. Once we have explored our interests, we understand one another, we realize that we're not really at cross purposes, but we've got limited resources, and so we've got to expand the pie. We've come up with all these options. Now, how are we going to decide which option is best? We're going to use objective criteria that we both agree to rather than, I'm going to set the rules or you're going to set the rules for how we're going to come together and we're going to agree on objective criteria for how we decide how we're going to create the solution or decide which solution is best. The fourth hallmark is to improve communication because we're talking about things. We're working together. We're sitting face to face, kneecap to kneecap. We're talking openly. When we feel frustrated or we feel some strong emotion, we're getting that out on the table. We're talking about, I'm frustrated about this and maybe I don't know, maybe I don't understand why, or I understand why and here's why. So we're getting all that out on the table and we're listening for understanding rather than listening to respond. That's key. We talk about listening and being good listeners, being active listeners. It's important that we listen to understand rather than listening to respond. We're trained to listen to respond because, when you came up through elementary school, the cool kid always had the best response, right? And so we want to be clever as educated people, and so we want to have the best, most intelligent, the most clever response to everything. No, you to be a good listener, you need to listen for understanding rather than just having a good comeback. It's more important to understand so you can resolve. Improving communication. The fifth hallmark of interest-based negotiation is building a positive negotiating relationship so that you don't feel tense, you don't feel overwhelmed, you don't feel like you're losing by coming to the table to negotiate. You improve the interaction, that you walk away with as a good experience. You're shaking hands after it if there's been some sort of tense interpersonal things going on. You're trying to build a bridge to the person and not just solve a problem. And then the sixth hallmark, and this is an important one, and that is your BATNA. I'm getting this out of Fisher and Ury, okay? Your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This is your superpower in negotiating. You decide before you go to the negotiating table, even in interest-based negotiation, what you can do on your own without a negotiated agreement. If that person comes and they're not negotiating in good faith, if you have to get up and walk out because it's going sideways, no matter what kind of negotiating you're doing, what's your best alternative? Know that before you go in, okay? Considering alternatives, and of all the alternatives, what is your best alternative? What can you accomplish on your own without an agreement? It's important, very important. And then the seventh and final is to obtain commitments. It's about drawing up that formal or informal agreement. How are we going to hold each other accountable to what we've decided here today in this negotiation? So there are some limitations that your book goes into detail on. Interest-based negotiation is not going to work with parties that distrust each other. That's why I mentioned a minute ago in rights-based, divorce mediation. When the trust is gone, it's kind of hard to expect two people to come to the table and negotiate in good faith. That's why, there's a set of rules, there are lawyers, and so it's the appropriate method for certain other types of mediation. Differences in strong principles. If you and another person are disputing about something that, where there's no middle ground, it has to do with your beliefs versus their beliefs and your values versus their values, and there's just no middle ground between the two, well, interest-based negotiation is going to be a tough road to go down. And then, of course, it's not culturally appropriate for every culture. Face-saving cultures don't do interest-based negotiation very well. There is a fourth approach, and that is transformative. This is a powerful, powerful approach, and one that I really want to know more about. This is the kind of negotiating that you want to do with people in your church family. This is a type of, or an approach to negotiation where we're focused on the relationship of the parties involved in the dispute or involved in the negotiation. We're trying to create positive change. It's an ongoing process rather than just a point in time, and it's process oriented. It requires us to empower one another. It requires us to have empathy for one another. And again, your book goes into great detail about limitations. So let's talk just a minute about a spiritual application here. Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 17 is a good look at why we want to engage and talk to one another, such as, informal types of negotiating. In Matthew 18, verse 15, you see that phrase there, if you've got a Bible with you, if a brother has wronged you, you feel like he's done something wrong to you, and you want to get this resolved. You want to mediate. You want to negotiate with them. Well, the first step is negotiating, and it's a private negotiation there. You see that phrase in verse 15, between you and him alone. Okay? This stresses the need to communicate, and to communicate openly, to talk with people rather than about people. It highlights for us the importance of keeping confidentiality, making it private. There's an emphasis here on taking care of things as privately and as locally as absolutely possible. Don't drag other people into it if it isn't necessary. And again, in verse 15, if he hears you is the phrase. When somebody, that's an important phrase, because if someone has the courage to come along and say, you've hurt me. As a Christian, you owe it to them to listen to what they've got to say, even if it's difficult to hear. And then on the other hand, if you are hearing this and you are being accused of doing something to harm somebody, it may be that, or if you're the one who's making the accusation, realize that this other person, they may not realize they've hurt you. And so it's important to talk about it. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. And that is the next phrase I want you to look at in verse 15. You've gained your brother. Not all conflict is bad. Sometimes doing the hard work to work through something is worthwhile to be a blessing on the relationship. You walk away with a stronger, better relationship. Verse 16, if he will not hear you, that's when you bring another person in it, and not before. And it's not a matter of you going and finding the people who agree with you, your allies, and you going and attacking this person and ganging up on them. That's not it. I think that this is telling us the importance of getting someone who's objective and neutral to come and kind of referee a conversation a second time coming to this person. And then 17, let him be to you like a heathen. I was asked one time, would you really excommunicate somebody? This isn't about excommunication. This is about making someone, applying pressure to someone, the church applying pressure to a wayward individual to bring them back. Because if you remember the context, these were Jewish Christians who they'd already lost access to the Jewish community. If they lost access to the Christian community, what were they going to do? Where were they going to turn? And so it's really about putting pressure on that person in a way that would call them back into fellowship and be eager to come back to the negotiating table. So, it's interesting to me that the Bible is there are so many examples of mediation and negotiation, of conflict management and resolution in the Scriptures that, it's so clear to me after all these years of studying it that it assumes conflict is going to happen. Not that we're going to be so righteous that we never, run afoul of one another. So important things to keep in mind. I hope that this has been helpful for you. I hope that you find this instructive. Reach out to me if you need me. Take care. Have a great week. Bye-bye.